Welcome to Property Mama Adventures in Real Estate, episode 27. It is here that we talk about all the shenanigans that goes on in the world of real estate. Buyers, sellers, real estate agents, they all have the ability to have shenanigans. I have been buying and selling real estate for almost 30 years. And I have seen a fair few bits and pieces in my time. If we've not met before, my name is Wendy Chamberlain. And I am a buyer's agent, a buyer's advocate here in Melbourne, Australia. So we help clients purchase homes. We also help clients sell homes. So today I wanted to have a chat around what happens when you buy a home, because I had a question this week. I met with somebody and they're not from locally to us here in Melbourne, in Victoria. They live interstate, so in another part of Australia. And it's a topical question because it depends on where you live, the jurisdiction in which you're buying into. So you may be buying locally to you, or you may be looking to make a move. You might be relocating for work or whatever reason and looking to buy into a jurisdiction that you're not familiar with. When it comes to the world of real estate, all things are very specific to the area in which you're looking, even so far as your legal representation, your solicitor or your lawyer that you need to bring on board as part of your team to help settle the property. So whether you're buying or selling, you need someone there that is going to be able to work on the paperwork for you. So that can involve them checking it if you're buying, or they need to actually put it together or compile it if you're selling. And one thing about real estate contracts is, remember that if you're the buyer, they are created and put together by the legal representative, be that your lawyer or solicitor, for the seller. So they are very much weighted in favour of the seller because that's who is paid to put the paperwork together. Another reason why I continue to say that it's so important to get your paperwork checked. When you're buying a property, get your paperwork checked because they are very cumbersome contracts, documents that have a lot of small print in there, fine detail. And if you're not buying or selling real estate on a regular basis, you're wading into waters in which you're unfamiliar. And so if you're wading through all of these, like literally pages and pages of paperwork that you need to comprehend and understand, this is where you need an expert stepping in, that it's their realm of speciality. It's also why we put clauses in when we're working with a buying client. We'll put clauses in where our rights need to be protected. So perhaps something is not to our favour that's been added as a special condition, because in these contracts you'll generally have general conditions and special conditions. The general conditions are basically in every single contract as a rule, whereas a special condition can be added in there, which oftentimes can turn the tables in favour of the vendor, particularly things around rates of interest that are paid, penalties, that kind of thing. They can add extra clauses in there that can, if the buyer ends up getting into a position where any of those clauses get triggered or enacted, it can be they can be at a disadvantage. So it's important to get these things checked. And it's what I wanted to talk about today because, as I said, that question came up through the week. I met with some people who are looking to purchase from interstate to buy here locally to me. And they asked, what happens if you can't settle the property? So when you purchase a property, there is a period between you signing the contract and then all of the ducks getting lined up by the various parties, and then what is called the settlement, or the day of settlement, or settlement date. And that's the date in which all of the parties make sure that the contracts get exchanged for settlement and the ownership basically changes hands. It's where the title of the property, so the ownership of the property, goes from the vendor, the person selling it, and then the name on the title is updated to be that of the buyer, the person buying the property. So settlement periods are different in lots of different jurisdictions depending on what is the norm. And I know in other states of Australia, for example, New South Wales, the standard is 45 days. In Queensland, it's similar, 45 days. In Victoria, which is where we mostly operate at the moment, it is your choice of what you want on there. Standard is 60 days, so 2 months. But you will hear 30 days, 45 days, 60, 90, 120. These are the various variations, if you like, on the possible settlement period. But the reality is, if all the parties agree, you can have whatever settlement period you want. It's important to understand what your needs are and what you need to meet in relation to timeframes and timelines, so that whatever you put on the paperwork is what is the best for you. So let's say you're a buyer and you are looking to buy a property and the vendor is after 120 days, which is often quite common where a seller is an owner occupier and they haven't yet found something else. They will often have a 90 or 120 day settlement. Conversely, if the seller is an investor with the property, either having a renter in there, a tenant is already in the property paying their rent each week, or the property is vacant, my experience is that those vendors often want their money quicker. So they'll be wanting quicker settlements, usually 30, 45, or at the outside, they'll want a 60-day settlement. And all of that is fine. 30 days is quite tight. And if you're working with a finance provider, be it your bank or your mortgage broker, they can sometimes go, that's really fast. And the issue that we find is not necessarily your ability to get your money together to be ready to settle. It's often the other parties, which is either the solicitor, but more to the point, it's generally the bank and the finance company being ready. Because remember, you're not the only one that they're dealing with. They're dealing with dozens, hundreds, thousands of people with various settlements at any given time. And there is a process, and you go in the queue and then you move along in the queue. And it can be an issue for you to jump the queue. And that's where problems arise, where the bank is not ready to settle. And we had that issue last week for a settlement for a client, insofar as there was other factors involved and the settlement was booked at 12:30 on that particular day, and the bank had confirmed that they were ready. However, half an hour before that time, they said they weren't ready to settle because they still had some boxes to tick, or dots, or what is it, cross your T's, dot your I's. They were still doing that. So settlement kept getting pushed by 30-minute slots until the bank was ready, because for whatever reason, they weren't ready. And it is not uncommon for this to happen. Now, settlement did happen on the day it was planned, which is excellent, because events get triggered if a settlement doesn't happen on the day. It generally doesn't matter what time, as long as it's on the date that it's planned. But where it starts to get pushed onto other days, this is what causes issues. So what happens when you can't settle on the day? So that's why it's so important for you to understand your circumstances, to know on a particular day, you're going to be ready, your ducks are all ready, they're all lined up, and all the parties involved on your side of things, most primarily being your bank or finance, is ready to go. And if you're not sure, get this checked out before you sign. Get that advice. So, for example, if you were going to go to auction on Saturday, potentially to buy a property, make sure you speak to your legal representative and say, okay, what date can I do? And speak to your mortgage broker or your bank or whomever is providing your finance and go, right, what is the minimum settlement date that I can put on this contract? Because once the contract is signed and all the parties agree and they put that date on the contract, that is the date you must meet. Now, my experience of having done this over many years, with lots of parties, people get excited and people say things and it's all very emotional and everybody's happy and everybody's best buddies on the day when you're signing the contract, because you've just bought a house, they've just sold their house, everyone's all happy and very polite and very pleasant to each other. As the days between that day when the contract is signed and settlement, which can be 30 days, 60 days, like 4 months later, humans become humans, and they will say things, do things differently to what they have done on the day when you signed. And if you need to change the date of a settlement, it has to be by agreement to the parties. So your solicitor, your legal representative, your lawyer, they will make a request to the legal representative of the seller. And it's up to them to agree. And they might say, no, too bad. So recently we had an example where the seller came to us for a client, and they were moving in from interstate. They had moved down to locally here in Melbourne, and they were renting at the time. So they'd taken out a rental while they were hunting, while they were here. And they could move out of that rental when it suited them. And we found a property, we purchased the property, and they had a date on the contract. The sellers, as it happens, were selling to move overseas. So they wanted a longer time. So we negotiated a time that was suitable to all parties on the day. On the day when the contract was signed, our client agreed to the day. The vendor, the seller, agreed to the day. As time went on and the seller realised they potentially needed more time to get themselves all sorted for moving to another country, they approached our legal representative to ask if they could have an extra 2 weeks. Our client said no, because our client had already organised their ducks in between times, and they had given notice to the rental company that they needed to move out of their rental to organise to be ready to move into the new home. So because they'd already given notice and that had already been done, they actually couldn't make other arrangements to move a date. So they said no. So this is the kind of thing that can happen. This is why it's so important to understand your timelines and be able to meet your timelines. So what happens when you can't settle? And it's generally more so from the buying side of things, because the rules are different between what happens if a buyer can't settle and what happens if a vendor can't settle. And please make sure you understand what the rules are depending on where you live and the jurisdiction that you're in and where you're buying, because it is different. It's absolutely different depending on where you are. So I remember a few years ago, we were hunting for a property for a client, and we looked at a particular property. Now, our clients were investors. They were looking for a property they could rent out straight away, and then down the track, potentially, they might look at developing the property. So we're on the hunt, and we're looking at various properties in this one particular suburb. And there was a property that I found. It was an older home, and the person that was living there was an older lady, and it, as often happens, it was the family home, and it had become too large for her, so she was looking to downsize. So because homes which are great for when you have a family living there, often when it just comes down to just one person living there, it becomes too much maintenance, and this is what had happened for her. So the home was perfectly livable. It had been a lovely large home that had been in the family for quite a number of years. And look, it was well maintained, but as things get older, things need to be, there's bits and bobs that needed to be doing. So I had a look at this property, and my clients decided that it needed just a little bit too much work than what they wanted to take on. They just wanted something that was more livable as it was, to be able to put a tenant in there straight away and rent it out. So I had a look at this property, gave the feedback all to my client, and they decided no. So I had provided that feedback on to the agent. Now, this particular property, we'd also asked through the process of looking at this property whether or not the vendor would look at an offer on it. And they said, no, they wanted to take it to auction, which is fine, and that's their prerogative to do. So the auction was at about 2 or 3 weeks after when we'd first looked at it. So that's fine. We went off and looked at other properties. We found another one which was off market, and we purchased that property. So that auction came and went on that particular home that we decided not to buy. And it was about 3 weeks later, and I get a call from this real estate agent, and she says, oh, I just wanted to know if you were interested at all in this property, the one that we had said no to. And I said, And I was watching the market, and I saw that it had got sold at auction, and I saw the price that it got sold for, and it was really odd to get this call 3 weeks later after the auction. And I said, that property got auctioned. I thought the property got sold. And she said, yes, it did get sold. And I said, so why are you ringing me about a sold property to see if we want to buy it? And she goes, well, what happened was that the buyers bid at auction, and the people that purchased the property was a couple, and it turned out that they were not able to settle the property because they couldn't get finance. Now, here in Victoria, under auction terms, it's an unconditional sale. If you put your hand up and bid at auction, you are buying that property. You can't get out of the property. You are on the hook. You've said, I'm going to buy that property. You're on the hook to buy it. You don't have any cooling off periods. You don't have any clauses that you can put in there. If you put your hand up on the day of the auction and bid to buy the property and the hammer falls to you, you are the buyer of that property. And what had happened for this couple was that when they went to go and get financing, the wife or the partner was not a permanent resident of Australia, so she couldn't get the finance. And then by himself, the husband or the male partner did not have, in the eyes of the bank, sufficient serviceability to be able to take out a loan. And so this poor couple have found themselves in a situation where they've bid at auction on the property, so they clearly didn't do their due diligence before. So that's another separate issue right there. But they've bid to buy this property, and I remember it, and the property was on 660 square meters, and it sold for $660,000. So I remember it. This is quirky things that you remember. And it had sold in November of whatever year it was. It was a few years ago. So it sold for $660,000, and we were in a market that was roaring. It was going up, and I remember it clearly for those things, that it was $660,000 on 660 square meters. And the agent said, do you have anybody that wants to buy this property? Now, in relation to not being able to settle, this vendor was obviously this lovely older lady who was downsizing, and she took pity on this couple because under the law, where a buyer is in default and can't settle on the property, here in Victoria, the vendor is entitled to take your deposit. So the deposit becomes the vendor's. So that would have been 10%. It's 10% as standard, whatever the deposit that you've paid. We do generally buy with 10%. It can be other figures than that. We buy on 5%. It can be a random number. It's all by agreement. But 10% is standard. So this buyer had paid 10%, so $66,000, to which the vendor was entitled to take because the buyer was in default and couldn't settle the property. Additionally, the vendor can sue the purchaser for the difference where they have to resell the property and they make a loss. So if you're in a market which is going down, which happens, markets go up, sideways, they go down, it happens all the time. Where you can't settle on a contract, the vendor is entitled to sue you for the difference. So this couple was out of pocket $66,000 plus anything that the vendor wanted to sue them for. Additionally, for every day that you can't settle, you're in default and you get charged penalty interest. So these are the rules here locally in Victoria. So check what the rules are for you, but I'll guarantee you there'll be some kind of penalty that can be applied by the vendor, by the seller, where the buyer is in default. And if they can't settle in 14 days or within 14 days, the vendor is well within their right to issue a notice that you're in default and you get 14 days to remedy it. And if you don't remedy it, they will take your deposit, they get to keep their house, and you as a buyer you're in a world of pain. So I clearly remember this because the agent said, do you know anybody? And at the time I had another client who was looking in this area, but they didn't want such a large house that needed repair, etc. They were looking for something that was more fixed up. And here's the thing, because we were going in such a rising market, basically whoever came in would just take over the contract on the date. So the settlement date was going to be in February. And so there was an opportunity here for somebody to step in and take over this contract and buy this property. And I remember it because It was due to settle in February. This was November. It might have been December by this point, and we were in a rising market. By the time this property settled, because I did track it, it was worth $724,000 based on a purchase price of $660,000. So someone could have made quite a neat little profit there on this property, which could have then been renovated or even become a development site and then resold. So you got to be careful that make sure that you're ready and you have all your resources available when it comes to purchasing. No matter where you are in the world, whatever your jurisdiction is, make sure you know which ducks you need to have and that they're all lined up, that you've got your financing sorted, that you've got all your paperwork sorted, because in most circumstances, the power rests with the vendor, with the seller of the home. And if you as a buyer coming in cannot complete the purchase, you're going to be in default, you're going to incur the penalties, and it's going to cost you a lot of money. So it is best to get it right. So on that note, if you are looking to purchase a property and you wish us as your buyer advocate to represent you, that's what we do. We are here to protect the interests of our buyer. All the things I talk about on my Property Mama Adventures in Real Estate. All of these scenarios that have happened in close to 3 decades of doing this. We've seen so many things. But having said that, there's always new adventures that are happening pretty much every single day, every single week, because we're dealing with humans and there is a lot of emotion involved with real estate. And I was actually talking to somebody today. We've got all these procedures in place to manage working with our clients, whether they're buyers or sellers. But because there's always different scenarios going on, these are organic documents. That's just the nature of real estate. So if you're struggling to find a property and you need a hand and you recognize that you do need a hand, we are here to help. Please reach out to us across our various social channels and we can have a conversation about what needs to happen for us to support you to best suit your needs. Additionally, no matter where you're located in the world, we have our getstartedinproperty.com.au mentoring program. It is the fundamentals there that we have put together. We have lots of resources that we've collated for you. We've got documents, we've got videos, we've got audios that step you through each of these pieces of the puzzle. You'll hear me talk about lining up your ducks, but knowing, first of all, which ducks you need to have in the line and then the order in which those ducks are placed. This is what we cover in our getstartedinproperty.com.au program. So no matter where you are around the world, this is a program for you if you want to educate yourself to have that confidence of what it takes to buy a piece of property, including the conversations that you need to be having with real estate agents. We've set these out for you. We've actually put together scripts for you to follow when you're on the phone speaking to the real estate agent to find out all of those questions you need to be asking so that you are the person that is in the box seat to be able to negotiate to buy that property. So if that's of interest to you, please go and have a look at getstartedinproperty.com.au. As always, happy to take your comments or any questions that you might have in relation to the world of real estate. There's so many things that can happen. There's such a curiosity around buying property, buying real estate, and I'm happy to cover off any of those questions for you. If you're loving listening to the Property Mama Adventures in Real Estate, please give us a thumbs up. Please share with friends, with family, with colleagues whom you know would love to listen as well, who can would benefit from being part of the Property Mama family. And I really look forward to you joining me on a future episode. Thanks for listening and bye-bye for now.